Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome back to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. Today's episode is for you if you are considering applying for colleges in the US. Last week, I was joined by Terry Thompson, college consultant, who shared her immense wisdom about the US college system and how to select the right schools, universities to apply to for you. Today, we're following that up with a conversation about college essays. That's the bit of your application that really gives you an opportunity to stand out and shine, especially for particularly competitive schools. So getting your essay right can be critical to getting the place you want at college, university. So to help us smash our essays out of the park, I'm joined by vastly experienced US tutor and education guru, Greg Smith, who's got a wonderful take on how to go about crafting a really great essay. It's a fascinating conversation. I learned a huge amount about a topic that was relatively new to me. So without further ado, let me introduce Greg and let's get right into things.
My name is Greg Smith. I am a 35-year educator, graduated from Middlebury College in 1985. I am married with two high school daughters. I have a business that I started 25 years ago called Northwest Educational Services that provides a range of services to a variety of different clients. But today I'm looking forward to telling you what I have learned over the years about college essay writing.
Outstanding. Well, look, I know that college essays are an important part of the process for applying to colleges and universities in the US, but that is about where my knowledge stops. So perhaps you could just walk us through some of the basics, as much for my benefit as anyone else's. So tell us, what are college essays and kind of what role do they play in the application process?
Sure. First thing that should be acknowledged is that the college essay writing exercise is actually probably more important than it's ever been as a result of current events of the last 2 years, ranging from, the pandemic limiting an ability for interviews to have taken place to the shift that's been occurring in this country with respect to standardized testing, an increasing number of schools that are moving away from using standardized exams like the SAT and the ACT for evaluation, a shift from the state of California's announced move away from the SAT exam. And what that means is that while the essay has always been one of many components in the application writing process, it has become a more important component. I've always described the essay as, unless you write something exceptionally bad, the essay is really one of these pieces that it is a net good. If it's well written, well done, it can have a positive impact on your acceptance at a particular school. But the essay cannot shift and make up for very low GPAs or very low standardized test scores, or weak teacher recommendations. But all of those things, standardized test scores, if a school is looking for them, your GPA, your course curriculum, your teacher recommendations, any possible interviews you had, and all of the other aspects of sort of saying who you are, those are all, they all have a part in the process. But what's happened now is that the essay, as a result of that, there's been a shift in power, so to speak, and you've dropped a little bit of influence on the part of the SAT, and therefore the essay is more carries more weight, more gravitas. I would also say that based on conversations that I've had with you previously, William, I've learned a little bit about the difference. And I think one of the, about applying to schools and writing essays in your European schools versus what happens in the United States. I have a bit of a standard joke that I make when working with American students, which is we have spent 12 years training you how to write an exceptional 5-paragraph externalized essay. And none of that is really appropriate preparation for what we want when we really do ask you to write the thing that potentially carries some of the biggest, decisions to date that you've ever made in your life, and certainly your parents, maybe, financially, that they're going to engage in, because we're going to ask you to write a character essay that's autobiographical, that is about yourself, that in effect gives a school a chance to get to know who you are. So there's a process, and we'll dig into some of the details about that. But I would say that's kind of the one big sort of philosophical thing to be aware of. And then just indicate that in the American college system, we have things like the common application process, in which schools are making it a little easier for you to apply to multiple schools because there's a singular application. And as part of that singular application, there is a list of 6 to 7 topics, depending upon the year, that you can choose from to write your primary essay about, that is then sent to all of the schools. And then depending upon the competitiveness of the school, you may end up with what are known as supplemental essays, which are additional writing prompts and opportunities. And if that's a piece that you want to explore, we can look a little bit into some strategy around how to manage multiple essay pieces. Not all schools are Common App schools, and so of course some schools just have their own essay. Generally speaking, there is a great deal of commonality among the topics for the primary essays that people write.
That's really helpful context. Just in terms of sort of timeline, before we get into some of the details and the process, which I'd love to explore with you, talk us through maybe a timeline for the year in terms of preparing for college essays. So perhaps when do they typically fall due for submission first? So when's the deadline we're working towards? And so working backwards from that, what are your kind of recommendations for students about, when to start thinking about essays, when to be really ramping up on them?
Yeah, so working backwards, there are 3 general deadlines in the college application process. One doesn't really impact essay writing traditionally, and that is what's known as rolling admissions. And rolling admission schools are those that are basically saying, hey, if we still have space and it's, April or May, of your senior year, please, apply, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can with whether or not you're a fit. And those schools tend to be less competitive, and they often, there are many schools in America that don't have essay writing requirements. But we're here to talk about 2 other groups of schools. The general major deadline tends to be somewhere between December 1 and January 1 for the majority of schools in the United States. And that's the traditional deadline that you have to meet. But there's another piece that's another group of schools that are known as, there's a process in America known as early admission. And early admission is an opportunity for a student to potentially apply early. Students often use this for potential that just right fit reach school, in which they are in effect going to be having slightly better odds in terms of their chances of admission, and so there's a lot of process pieces that people more knowledgeable than myself go into in making those kinds of decisions about what to make an early decision school. But that is generally a deadline somewhere between November 1 and November 15. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule, but those are going to cover probably 99% of schools that want a college essay. Either an early admissions deadline to think about, again, November 1 to November 15, or a regular admissions deadline sometime between December 1 and January 1. So if you roll backwards, typically then the way to think about this is, so that's during a student's senior year, those time periods we're thinking about. And so they're in their senior year, they're thinking about their transcript and their grades and their teacher recommendations. And what's important to recognize is, therefore, they're very busy. And they're working hard, students are, towards making sure that a big chunk of their application is strong. And that means that what you'd like to not have to have is carrying a great deal of responsibility for this primary essay. And there will be no shortage of these supplementary essays that I talked about that many students are working hard to manage in the months of September, October, November, up to final deadlines of submission. And it always ends up being very much an 11th hour process when you're applying to competitive schools. So if we keep backing up, then the thing that I generally coach when families ask me is to say, the summer between your junior and senior year is a great time period to try to knock out that primary essay, that essay that would be the common application essay, or the primary essay for whatever school. I live in Seattle, Washington. The University of Washington doesn't. Its application essays are remarkably similar to the Common App essays. And the idea is, when students are getting ready, whether they're applying to a non-Common App school or Common App school, my coaching would always be, try to take care of this in the summer if you can, because you're going to have plenty of other things you need to do. So it's something to take off the table. And I would love to tell you that every one of my students always listens to that piece of advice. But the truth is that people are often doing things right at the last minute. However, the best essays start in the summer. And the single biggest reason is what I alluded to earlier. We've trained you the wrong way for 12 years, and it's not your fault, but we've trained you to research the other. And it turns out it's very challenging to research yourself. And it turns out there's a writing style that comes with that, and a process that comes with that most students always tell me makes them very uncomfortable at first. And everybody eventually gets there, but it takes some practice. It doesn't usually come naturally to a lot of students.
So clearly some sort of specific challenges to overcome. And, hopefully we're making a good start over the summer. But if not, maybe, hopefully the advice will still help us, no matter how close to the deadline we've left it. But in an ideal world, we're kind of getting a good start on that over the summer. You've mentioned that the essays tend to look inwards. They're kind of about yourself. Maybe you could give us a flavour of the sort of topic or question you might have to write on. And then, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your advice on best practice for actually starting to produce one of these essays.
You bet. Okay, so I often will start this conversation with students about what this essay is not. This essay is not a 5-paragraph, 600 to 650 word review of what I refer to as your bright shinies. It shouldn't be a overview that talks about all the awards you've won and all of the successes that you've had and competitions won and grades earned, because the rest of your application speaks to all of those things. The thing that almost all of the prompts have in common, when you begin to look across all of the different styles of prompts that you see on the Common App or as the main essay prompt for a non-Common Application school, they all tend to start falling into just a few simple categories. And I liken this to try to help people get the mindset right. I try to help them understand, I want you to think about what a college is. And I want you to think of it in terms of, it's a business, and they are hiring, and they are interviewing prospective employees. And from a college's standpoint, one of the major things that they are concerned with at all times is, number one, they would like a 4-year income from a prospective student, which is a little crass, but the thing to understand is what that means is they want someone that is going to handle with resilience and grit challenge, because 99.9% of all high school students will have the following common experience. College will be the most challenging academic thing they've ever done in their lives. And that's not a scary statement. It's just to recognize that when colleges, they're going to ask this form of a question where they basically want to know, what challenges or difficulties have you faced? How have you engaged difficulties or challenges? And talk about kind of your, for lack of a better phrase, your growth mindset, your ability to bounce back, to, engage difficulty, to be, as they say, knocked down, but get back up and keep moving. And that is one whole style. And that is not the right fit for all students, but that is definitely one style of question that is worth talking about. And that's very counterintuitive. The last thing that any applicant applying to a college thinks that they should ever be engaging is that time when something was hard and challenging. And often, not always, but often when you begin to interview and work with a student, you can begin to help them see like, no, that was pretty amazing the way you handled that. I want you to notice that real character growth, real change, it doesn't happen from a whole series of pats on the back. Good job. It tends to come from a position of, oh, wow, no, I had to really fight hard, work hard to push through something difficult and challenging. And when students, it's fun to see it when they realize like, oh, yeah, college would really be interested in that. Again, not the right fit for all students, but that is a huge category. And so sometimes I will engage that with students by saying, cool, let's actually write up a little resume for yourself. So I want you to give me all of the bright shinies. Okay, now flip the piece of paper over and I want you to tell me every unmitigated disaster you can think of or any real hardship or something that was difficult. And what we actually do is say, okay, we needed to get that other thing out of the way. Now let's take a closer look at some of the challenges. And what we may discover is that literal diamond in the rough. There may be something in there that is really brilliant to explore and write about. So that's one whole style. Another style of question is, again, going back to our model of a business that's interviewing and what are they looking for? There are questions that engage diversity, that engage the idea of community and where you came from and how you built community in your life. And I use a little story about Harvard. Harvard every year, if they wanted to, could simply easily accept a class that was 100% made up of 4.0 GPAs and 1,600 SATs. They have more than enough applicants that do that. And yet they don't do that every year. And that's because, no offense to anyone that's a 4.0 1,600, but they don't want an entire freshman class made up of that. They know that that doesn't produce the kind of community and engagement that they want. And so there are questions that are about talking about where you came from, what community are you a part of, how have you contributed to that community, how have you engaged possibly issues around diversity or difference. So there's a whole category of questions that look at that. And again, just like the first general topic, very autobiographical. A lot of people don't realize that the community they are from, it's a little like, well, I don't know anything else. It's who I am. And like, yes, but you should know how amazing and powerful and unique that is. And so that particular topic, sometimes they have enough other voices in their lives to help give them perspective. In my particular case, sometimes that's my job, is to help reflect back to them, that is a very cool, unique thing that you're offering, and that people would like to see that. So big second category. And then the third one I describe as, let's remember what the institutions are at the end of the day. These are institutions of learning. And what do they want out of learners? They don't want rote automatons that are amazing note takers that simply demonstrate no personal initiative or engagement with academics. They want people with passion and curiosity. And so what they want to do then is provide an opportunity for the candidate for whom this is the right fit to talk about their passions, to talk about the things that get them excited. And it's not necessarily an excitement that is unique just to academics or school. What most colleges know is that passion in any one particular area can be pivoted to any area. And that sometimes if students have that skill set, that's a skill set that's very intriguing and interesting to colleges. And again, that one is exploration. An example of one that gets complicated these days is when someone wants to tell me they have a passion for VR gaming, and virtual reality gaming. And it's like, okay, we need to play now the employer role for just a minute. What are some downfalls that you know about VR gaming? And students will share and go, oh, got it. Yeah. No, 8 straight hours, after school until 1 o'clock in the morning is not what I want to share, with a college. That piece isn't attractive. But sometimes you get some amazing things that come up about, like, they start telling stories and you begin to realize that what this passion did was, I had one student, for instance, he got really into 3D printing as a result of some gaming pieces where he was trying to design better sound. And what he did was he did his own research and figured out how to design a surround sound system that turned out to be much more applicable actually to a home entertainment environment. And so he built this complete unique system, and in parts using 3D technology, printing technology. And it's like, okay, now that is a road that a school would be interested in. I had another student that was once just thought, there's no way I'm going to get into college. He just didn't see himself as a college type student, but he had severe dyslexia, really big learning differences, and he just thought school had always been such a challenge and so difficult. But with a little support from his mom, he just kind of kept nickel and diming forward. And we got to the essay and he's like, I don't have anything. And then it turns out that he has this incredible passion for baseball cards and for getting autographs. And I started interviewing him, and I was just blown away by his experiences and his connectivity with members in this community. It was in effect a community essay, but simultaneously it was this passion essay, and it was fantastic. And he quite literally, he so under-applied. He got into every school he applied to, and Mom and I both agreed, like, no, his essay was amazing in terms of what it said about him, and it put him in a context. So that's a big overarching feel for the various types.
Okay, so a number of main categories then. So there's sort of the overcoming challenge, showing resilience in the face of something that was initially hard. There's when you're talking about, where you come from, your sense of community, how you might have sort of fostered diversity a little in your life and in your community. And then there's sort of, passion for a particular issue and how you might have demonstrated that. And I loved some of your examples there. One of the things that I think is so exciting about the world we live in today, from the perspective of someone applying to university, college, or even sort of applying for jobs, is that we have the opportunity to go beyond just telling people that we're interested in something. We can show people that we're interested in something, show that recruitment officer that you have such a passion and or interest for a subject. And, if you're interested in journalism, start a blog about your interest in the news or politics. If you're interested in any sort of performing or video editing where the output might be video, have a little YouTube channel showcasing some of the things you've done. All these tools, it's moving on a step from applying to college, coming out the other side and applying to jobs. But, one of my peers at university was applying for Google. Back in the day, this was incredibly competitive. It's still quite competitive as an employer to work for, but 10 years ago, far more so. And he had gone away and put together a kind of web tool that ended up being used by thousands of students across the campus, a sort of mini Facebook almost. And, he used that as part of his application for Google, and it was ultimately very successful and landed a place. So, I think the tools particularly the tools of the internet, and the tools of, what the modern software and technology allows us to do is amazing in terms of allowing us to show off effectively our passions and our capabilities. And I think these are really interesting routes to go down for applying for college and university as well. let's get into the process of writing itself. So you've kind of hinted a little bit at some of the tools you might use. That sort of, I really like that resume, double-sided resume, the bright, shiny rewards and accolades on one side, and then all the challenges you overcome on the other side. And any further thoughts you'd want to share about the process of actually getting the thing itself written?
Sure. Quick comment on the last piece you were just speaking of. I couldn't agree more about tools that are available. But one of the interesting themes that comes up there is if we were getting to talk to a freshman or sophomore in high school, I would always recommend the idea of the importance of take risks, and they don't all pan out. And sometimes those risks that don't pan out are unbelievably wonderful topics, because regardless, when we take that risk, it's not failure if we end up not liking it. It's actually helping us with direction. It's pathfinding. And that is actually a very important part. So that idea of the scripted, I will do X, Y, and Z activities as a means of broadening my resume and all those things. It's not that those are bad things. It's that what often gets overlooked in that is the importance of really trying to figure out what your passion is and following that, and the risks that come from that. So I think that's great. Okay, so in terms of writing process, I talk about this concept of we have trained students to learn how to research information outside of ourselves in order to write a paper, write a lab report, go to the internet, find the resources, get the particular books, periodicals that you need, read the articles, take the notes, pull the quotes, build a brainstorm, turn that into an outline, organize that outline, make sure you set it up. There's that intro that's going to tell us where we're going, that thesis statement that closes out that opening paragraph, 3 main bodies, topic sentence to each of them, hitting your main arguments, and then wrap it all up. And while it is okay to write that essay, for the most part, those tend to be essays that do what I refer to as they check the box. And you have to turn in an essay. Okay, it's certainly not going to hurt your cause. But from a competitive standpoint, it's important to remember, your essay is getting read and you are competing with an unknown group of peers in a way that is complex and often hard to understand. But the idea is you would like your essay to make a difference. And I describe it as you need to imagine a round table with, say, 4 of the smartest humans you've ever written for before, and they've all got a pile of essays, and it's a job, and they're working through these essays. And what you're hoping for is that the person that reads your essay, because what they're doing is they're sorting them all. They're sorting them into, oh gosh, no, definitely no, don't take this student. This is, scary, maybe. They're sorting it into, sure, perfectly fine essay. Okay. And then they do this, and this is the one you're always shooting for, which is, hey, Joe, check this one out. And it's a pass. You want that essay passed to a second reader because you made the first reader feel something. And it turns out that at the end of the day, humans respond best to emotion and feeling. And so if we can trigger some kind of emotion or feeling, if we can speak to something that is a truism, in a way that connects, that's always the most powerful. Okay. Well, of course, authors have been searching for this their whole lives. That's pretty high standard we're setting here. But that's the game that I like to play with students, is to help them understand that. And so in order to do that, there's a few different elements. One is to teach students about the difference between show versus tell writing. You alluded to that earlier. Tell writing is very much that traditional 5-paragraph essay format. There is nothing wrong with tell writing. Sometimes it's a bridge too far to try to help students move past tell writing and into show writing, and that's all fine. But if I can, I would always love to help a student move into more of a show piece. And a show piece is one where it doesn't have a huge time arc. It tends to be more in a moment. It often will use flashbacks as a means of painting a picture. It might use moments of what you're feeling or experiencing now as a result of this singular moment that you were writing about. But it tends to be more focused, and we tend to feel ourselves dropping into a part of a student's life, and we feel that specificity. So how do you get there? Well, the first thing we got to do is allow people to tell a whole bunch on paper. And so we can train most high school students to be able to write a 500-word essay where they can probably write 525 words by the time they get to their senior year, and they'll have the 500 that they're going to keep. And most students get very mechanical about that. What I want people to understand when they're writing college essays is the thing that you're researching and the way that you do the research is you're researching yourself, and you do that with an awful lot of writing. And it's an awful lot of writing that at the end of the day doesn't get used. And that can be very frustrating at first for students. And so I talk about the idea of, we talk about inspiration and muse. And I will make the little story about, like, I want you to imagine you're sitting by a window and there's this beautiful bluebird that ever so rarely, but every once in a while, perches on your windowsill. And you have learned to keep your window cracked because you love to hear the song when it lands, and you love looking at this bluebird. And that's your muse. Well, that muse, not only can you not engage that muse if the window blinds aren't open and the window is cracked a little bit, but more importantly, you can't engage that muse, the possibility of that muse, if you're not sitting at that table every day. And if you're not engaging in that writing process, because it's really important to recognize, by definition, what you're writing won't feel worthy. It won't feel good enough. And why should it be? You don't have any experience researching yourself. So one of the primary things that I tell people is you need to start spending regular time engaging. So for instance, with the Common App prompts, someone may look at those and go, boy, I don't have any idea which one is the right prompt for me. And I say, well, there's a really good process. If for nothing else, at a very mechanical level, get out a timer, set something, and spend 5 minutes writing on every single one of them. So 35 to 40 minutes later, sometimes you discover something. You realize there was something in you that felt more natural. And sometimes you discover something wonderful, which is, I hate this prompt. I got nothing. I can't think of anything like that. That doesn't seem to be a fit for me. And that's great. That's a wonderful realization. So writing is the means by which you discover that. So my coaching is always, you learn through writing. You figure out your voice and what you can talk about. The next thing that I tell people is, I'm a huge fan of outlining. When I'm helping students learn how to write better papers, I don't think we spend enough time. I don't think we revise outlines enough, before we jump into writing. But I don't actually recommend outlining for essays. For the college essay, my own experience with students tends to be this. They write to discover. They're trying to find a voice. They find 2 lines that they like, and they go, yeah, let's play off of that. Let me go into that story. And then they write some more about that, and that expands. And then they find in that 3 different spots that they really resonate with. And like, yeah, let's drop into that and explore that more. And then this really interesting thing happens. They discover that they've gotten enough fluency in their writing that when it clicks in their mind, they will often sit down and inside of an hour write from beginning to end the essay that becomes, in effect, that 525 words that they just need to tweak a little bit, and there it is. But everything that came before that, that was that personal research that needed to be done. So that's a really hard thing to sell students on and to help them understand and appreciate, is that importance of writing their way into their essay process. Now, there's always exceptions to every rule, and some students have a story strong, ready to go, bam, they write it. They can outline a series of events that they want to write about, and it all works. But for most students, if you want to help them create that difference-making essay, that's the process that I found the most success with over time, is to get students to kind of write their way in. And then once they find that message, that story, that set of details, rich details, that help paint a picture, oftentimes rather than, as I jokingly refer to it, rather than Frankensteining the essay and trying to now fix and move and change, I'm like, hang on, how long do you think it would take you just to write the story? And once they realize that, oh, well, in 45 minutes to an hour, I can probably write 4 or 5 paragraphs. I'm like, yeah, go write that. And it's always a better story once they're ready for it. So that would be kind of big picture process. And then, the more subtle details might look into things like, an active versus a passive voice in their writing, noting the number of times that is, are, am, was, were are showing up in their essays, and can we, empower that writing with some more active verb choice, recognizing that transitions in one of these essays are really about flashbacks and creating, understanding for different, points of significance or importance in the essay.
That's great. That's absolutely fascinating. And I love that just sort of overarching philosophy of writing for discovery, and always the writing being the research process. I got quite interested in the creative process in years gone by, and sidebar, highly recommend Creativity Inc., which is by one of the founders of Pixar, and talks all about the creative process going on inside Pixar. You'll hear very similar ideas coming out of these kind of very, very famous creative powerhouses like Pixar and the like, to what Greg's just been saying. So I think that's fascinating and really, really helpful. Greg, I'm conscious we are hurtling towards the end of our time together very rapidly. So I just wanted to ask, is there anything burning that we haven't talked about or touched on that you feel is very helpful to mention before we wrap up?
I will mention one that is often, again, something that I think is really important that students avoid, which is the idea is we're moving off to this great moment of independence. We're heading off to, 4+ years of, our own outside of the home piece. And as a result, many students will shy away from engaging with their parents around these essays. And there's a very much overlooked resource that I have had enormous success with students where they realize this was great, which is with the various prompts, engage mom and dad and just to hear stories, just their own thoughts. You're not looking to them for this should be the essay. This is what you should write about. But when you begin to have memories of things and you're trying to put things in context and just remembering even 6 months ago and, what they might have seen, engage parents with those kinds of stories and see what other details that they remember and that they bring out. Sometimes it is just incredibly powerful what comes up. Just recently, I had a student that was just struggling to try to find himself in his research process. And there was a completely overlooked thing that when he brought it up to his mom, she didn't hesitate. And she pointed out, I think you should really give some thought to recording your experiences at the hardware store, which was your first job this last year during the pandemic, and just start telling stories. And mom was very, very good about, she kind of left it at that. And he said, "Oh, all right." And he took it enough to share it with me. And I said, "Well, okay, I didn't know you had a job. I didn't know that this was a piece." And it turned out he wrote this unbelievable essay that was his form of community. And it turns out that he had a real passion for connecting with people. And it all came out with these wonderful anecdotes about the people in his community that were coming into his hardware store, looking for a new fastener, a different type of screw, a different hex nut. And you wouldn't have thought, it was the topic, but it turns out it was wonderful. So parents, often overlooked resource.
Well, amen to that. I think that's a fantastic note to end what has been a phenomenal masterclass, Greg, on the college essay process. I've learned an awful lot about how it all works, and I'm sure anyone listening who's interested in applying for a school in the US will have taken an awful lot from this as well. So thank you. For any listeners that are interested in finding out a bit more about you and potentially how to work with you, if they're interested in such things, perhaps we could just finish by signposting to where you'd point people to.
Sure. So I have a website, nwtutoring.com. The NW is short for Northwest. My business is called Northwest Educational Services. I have the privilege of working with a dozen other coaches, probably half a dozen of whom love supporting this kind of writing process that I've been talking about today. And you can find contact information for how to reach out to us on our website if you ever wanted to learn more. I pivoted 2 years ago and from an in-person business to a Zoom-based business. And while we will be, offering in-person services, we will forever and always have a Zoom presence, and we have certainly learned how to do that successfully and support students.
Outstanding. Well, Greg, thank you ever so much. We'll put that link in the show notes as well for anybody that's interested, nwtutoring.com. Greg, thank you so much once again. It's been an absolutely fascinating and incredibly valuable conversation. Thank you so much for giving up the time.
Well, William, thank you so much for the opportunity.